Welcome to your video on section 8.10, where we're going to talk about the pelvic girdle and its functions. So our pelvis is made up of 4 bones. We have our sacrum, the coccyx, and the right and left Oscoxa, or the hip bones. And this helps to support the viscera, or the organs, in our inferior part of the ventral body cavity. Our pelvic girdle is made up of just our left and right Oscoxa. And it's going to articulate with our trunk. It's going to provide attachment points for our lower limbs, and it's also angled slightly anteriorly when we're standing upright. So you can see that this is a normal neutral pelvis. It's just angled slightly anteriorly, but some people, they have more of an anterior pelvic tilt to their body, and for some people, they have more of a posterior pelvic tilt to their body. So we'll start off with the Oscoxa, or the Oscoxa for plural. This is our hip bone, and it's going to be comprised of the ilium bone, the ischium bone, and the pubis. And we'll see that these bones are actually separated up until we reach the ages between 13 and 15 years old. Sometimes they won't even fuse until you're 18 or the low 20s. And it's going to articulate posteriorly with the sacrum at the sacroiliac joint, just how we saw over here in this photo. And the femur is going to articulate with this structure here called the acetabulum. This is a deep curved depression on the lateral Oscoxa, and it's a region where we're going to have the 3 bones that we listed, the ilium, ischium, and pubis, fused together. And then we have our C-shaped smooth surface on this acetabulum called the lunate surface. So it's the area all in gray over here. That's going to be the part that's going to articulate with the femoral head. Now, talking about the ilium on its own, we'll see that it's forming the superior region of our Oscoxa and forms part of the acetabular surface on the lateral side of this Oscoxa. We'll see that the ilium is a wide fan-shaped region. Remember that word ala that we talked about in the sacrum, meaning wing? So this is the ala, or the wing of the ilium. It's going to terminate inferiorly at the arcuate line here, which is just a ridge, and on the medial surface. We can also find the ala on the medial surface of the ilium. So all of this in here. A depression that we're going to find on this medial side is called the iliac fossa, which has the iliacus muscle that lies within it. And posteriorly, we'll have attachment sites for gluteal muscles. I said posteriorly, but I meant laterally on the lateral surface here. So we have an anterior gluteal line, a posterior gluteal line, and inferior gluteal line, which is found right over here. We also can find a auricular surface, which is this ear-shaped structure here on a medial view, where the ilium is going to articulate with the sacrum, and this is found on the posterior medial side. This ridge that we find on top is called our iliac crest, and this is the superiormost ridge on the ilium. Now let's move on to our ischium bone over here. This is going to fuse to the ilium near the superior posterior margins of the acetabulum. And we have some special structures on here, like the ischial spine posterior to the acetabulum. We have the ischial body, which is this region in here, that is just bulky bone superior to this ischial spine. And our lesser sciatic notch in here, which is a semicircular depression inferior to the ischial spine. More inferiorly, we have this roughened projection called the ischial tuberosity on the posterior lateral border. And this is also known as your sits bones. It will help to wear weight of our body in our sitting position. And we have our ischial ramus here, or ramus of the ischium. This extends from the ischial tuberosity toward anterior fusion with the pubis. Now for our pubis bone. This is going to fuse with the ilium and the ischium at the acetabulum, and we're going to see the fusion of this inferior pubic ramus with the ischial ramus, or ramus of the ischium, and together they form the ischiopubic ramus. Over here, we're going to have our superior pubic ramus that originates at the anterior margin of our acetabulum, and our body of the pubis here can be found between the superior pubic ramus and the inferior pubic ramus. This large hole here is called the obturator foramen and is going to be encircled by the pubic and ischial rami. This area will also be covered with what's known as the obturator membrane. If we look at this roughened ridge on our pubis, this is called your pubic crest, and it could be found on the anterior-superior portion of the superior pubic ramus, and it's going to end at this bump here called the pubic tubercle. Now, if we look at this medial view, you could see this elongated oval shape here, which is our symphyseal surface. This will be the site of articulation between the two pubic bones on your right and left oscoxa. We also have this special area known as your pectineal line, which you see in a medial view over here. It originates across the pubis and will merge with this arcuate line that we find on the ilium. Now let's talk about our true and false pelvis. Our pelvic brim, which you can see right in here, is going to be a continuous oval ridge, so you can kind of see it when we look over here. We're going to have our regions of our true and false pelvis in these pictures, but it's this brim right over here, in which is extending to the inferior edges of the sacral ala, those wings over here, and the promontory, and it helps divide the pelvis into true and false pelvi. So first, let's take a look at our true pelvis. This is inferior to that pelvic brim, and it encloses our pelvic cavity and contains all of our pelvic organs within it. And then using that same pelvic brim, if we look superior to that brim, we're going to see that this area is going to house inferior abdominal organs. Now let's talk about your pelvic inlet. This is positioned in the space that is enclosed by that pelvic rim. So if you look at the blue in here, it's all of the space found within this blue line, and it marks the boundary between that true and false pelvis we just talked about. Now our pelvic outlet, which you can see over here, this is inferiorly placed and is bound by the coccyx, the ischial tuberosities, and the inferior border of the symphyseal surface. So you can see that view in red over here in the female-like pelvis, and here in red in the male-like pelvis. This area will be covered with muscles and skin and forms the perineum, and we'll talk about perineum more in our reproductive system. The width and size is very important in females because we have to make sure that the pelvis is wide enough to accommodate for a fetal head. So I always compare the pelvi as when you were in grade school and you folded your paper as a hot dog or a hamburger. So the female would be a hamburger in that it is shorter and it is wider, whereas the male would be the hot dog fold. So it is taller and more narrow. Now we can determine the sex of a skeleton by looking at a couple structural differences. For instance, the Oscoxa is the most sexually dimorphic bone due to the demands of pregnancy and childbirth that we talked about with the female pelvis. So we see that it is shallower or shorter and wider, like I mentioned earlier. And it's also due to the female ilium flaring more laterally, and our female acetabulum is also going to project more laterally. And lastly, the female greater sciatic notch, which you could see back in here, is wider than compared to that of the males. Our female sacrum is also going to be shorter and wider, and the body of the pubis is going to be longer and more rectangle shaped in women. And we also need to look at this subpubic angle. So the angle when our pubic bones are aligned at that symphyseal surface is the region we're talking about. And we see that in females, this is going to be wider and more convex than when we look at the subpubic angle of males. We can also start to see some changes in the Oscoxa as we age. So that can help us estimate the age at death. Some of the age-related changes that we're going to see is if we look at the auricular surface, of the ilium that the sacrum is going to attach to. So you can see how this is changing over the years. And another really important structure is the symphyseal surface of the pubis. So this will serve as one of the most reliable indicators of age of death. So you can see this nice shape in the young person, middle-aged over here, and then old. You can see how that has changed so much than compared to when that person was young.